Ever wondered what drives someone to venture into the unknown? What makes a person willing to risk everything, even their life, for discovery? Number 9. Amelia Earhart, The Sky's Mystery. What happens when you disappear without a trace? In 1937, the world asked this question as Amelia Earhart vanished somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. Amelia Earhart wasn't just any pilot. She was a sensation, a celebrity who broke barriers in aviation during a time when women were expected to keep their feet firmly on the ground. In 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. This achievement alone would have secured her place in history, but Earhart was always looking toward the horizon, always planning the next impossible journey. Her final expedition was meant to be her crowning achievement, circumnavigating the globe along the equator, a 29,000-mile journey. With navigator Fred Noonan, she completed nearly two-thirds of the trip before things went wrong. On July 2, 1937, after taking off from Lee, New Guinea, headed for Howland Island, Earhart sent her last known radio message. "We are on the line 157-337. We are running on line north and south." Then, silence. The U.S. government launched what was then the most expensive sea and air search in history, but no trace of Earhart, Noonan, or their Lockheed Electra plane was ever found. Theories about her fate range from the straightforward, she ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean, to the fantastic, she was captured by the Japanese as a spy, or she survived and assumed a new identity. In recent years, some researchers believe they've found evidence suggesting she may have survived for a time as a castaway on Gardner Island, now Nikimararo, where fragments of what might be her plane and a woman's shoe have been discovered. Whatever her ultimate fate, Earhart's legacy as an aviation pioneer and an inspiration to generations of women remains undiminished. Her famous words, "Please know that I am aware of the hazards. I want to do it because I want to do it. Women must try to do things as men have tried," capture the pioneering spirit that drove her into the unknown skies from which she never returned. Number 8. Robert Falcon Scott, Frozen Ambition. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of second place? Robert Falcon Scott did, in the most extreme environment on Earth, and it cost him everything. The race to the South Pole in the early 20th century captured the world's imagination. Scott, a British Royal Navy officer, led the Terra Nova expedition in 1910 with the goal of being the first to reach the geographic South Pole. What followed was one of the most famous stories of triumph and tragedy in exploration history. After an arduous journey across the Antarctic ice, Scott and 4 companions reached the South Pole on January 17, 1912. But instead of glory, they found devastation, the Norwegian flag planted by their rival Roald Amundsen, who had reached the pole 5 weeks earlier on December 14, 1911. In his diary, Scott wrote simply, "The worst has happened, all the daydreams must go, great God, this is an awful place." The disappointment of being second would soon be overshadowed by the fight for survival. The return journey became a desperate battle against worsening weather, dwindling supplies, frostbite, and exhaustion. One by one, Scott's men succumbed. Edgar Evans was the first to die, followed by Lawrence Oates, who famously walked out of their tent into a blizzard with the words, "I am just going outside and maybe sometime," a selfless attempt to give his companions a better chance. Scott, along with Edward Wilson and Henry Bowers, made it to within 11 miles of a supply depot but were trapped by a fierce blizzard. They died in their tent around March 29, 1912. Scott's last diary entry, dated March 29, reads, "We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. R. Scott, for God's sake look after our people." Their bodies were found by a search party the following spring. Scott's diary and letters were recovered, telling the world of their ordeal. In his final letter to the public, Scott wrote lines that would immortalize him. "We took risks, we knew we took them, things have come out against us and therefore we have no cause for complaint." The tragedy of Scott's expedition stands in stark contrast to Amundsen's successful journey. While Amundsen had meticulously planned his expedition using dog sleds and drawing on Inuit techniques, Scott relied more on man-hauling and untested motorized sledges. Yet despite the failures in strategy, Scott's death cemented his status as a British hero who embodied stoic courage in the face of adversity. Number 7. George Mallory, The Mountain Secret. Did he make it to the top? This question has haunted mountaineering history since George Mallory and Andrew Irvine disappeared high on Mount Everest in 1924. Because it's there. These 3 words, Mallory's famous response when asked why he wanted to climb Everest, have become the mantra of adventurers everywhere. But Mallory's quest to stand atop the world's highest peak would ultimately cost him his life in one of exploration's most enduring mysteries. George Mallory wasn't just any climber. Described as having a physical beauty that was so startling as to seem unreal, the 37-year-old was already a seasoned mountaineer and veteran of 2 previous Everest expeditions when he joined the 1924 British Mount Everest expedition. The summit of Everest, standing at 29,029 feet, had never been conquered. On June 8, 1924, Mallory and his young climbing partner Andrew "Sandy" Irvine set out from their high camp for a summit attempt. They were last seen by expedition member Noel Odell, who reported spotting them climbing a challenging section called the Second Step, about 800 feet below the summit. Odell noted they were going strong for the top, but then clouds enveloped the mountain. Mallory and Irvine were never seen alive again. Did they reach the summit before they died? This question has fascinated the mountaineering world for nearly a century. If they did, they would have beaten Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay's acclaimed first ascent by 29 years. The mystery deepened in 1999 when Mallory's body was finally discovered by a research expedition at 26,760 feet on the north face of Everest. His body was remarkably well preserved by the cold, with notes still in his pockets and his name clearly visible on his clothing. But the camera he and Irvine carried, which might contain summit photos and solve the mystery once and for all, was not found. Irvine's body remains missing, though his ice axe was discovered in 1933. Forensic analysis of Mallory's body revealed a severe rope injury around his waist, suggesting he and Irvine had been roped together when one of them fell. He also had a broken leg and a puncture wound to his forehead, indicating a violent fall. Intriguingly, a photograph of his wife Ruth, which he had promised to place on the summit, was missing from his possessions. Whether Mallory and Irvine reached the summit remains one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries. As mountaineer Conrad Anker, who found Mallory's body, said, "It's a much better mystery than it is a story with a clean answer." What's certain is that Mallory's pioneering spirit and ultimate sacrifice on Everest's unforgiving slopes have secured his place among the greatest explorers who died in pursuit of the unknown. Number 6. Steve Fawcett, The Final Flight. What drives a person to break over 100 world records? Steve Fawcett's insatiable hunger for adventure pushed boundaries in air, land, and sea, until one day he flew into the Nevada sky and vanished. Steve Fawcett wasn't your typical adventurer. A successful businessman who made his fortune in financial markets, Fawcett could have enjoyed a comfortable life of luxury. Instead, he channeled his resources into pursuing increasingly daring feats that continually redefined what humans could achieve. On September 3, 2007, Fawcett took off in a single-engine Bellanca Super Decathlon from a private ranch in Nevada for what was supposed to be a short pleasure flight. He never returned. The disappearance triggered the most extensive air and ground search operation in U.S. history, covering thousands of square miles of rugged terrain. Despite the efforts of the Civil Air Patrol, Nevada National Guard, and even Google Earth users who were recruited to search satellite imagery, no trace of Fawcett or his aircraft emerged. For months, the mystery of what happened to Fawcett captivated the public. How could a man who had successfully navigated some of the world's most treacherous environments simply disappear? Fawcett had survived countless close calls throughout his career, being dragged underwater during a transatlantic sailing attempt, nearly dying when his balloon caught fire over the Coral Sea, and weathering a harrowing emergency landing in the Sahara Desert. Rumors and theories multiplied. Some suggested he had staged his disappearance, while others speculated about mechanical failure or extreme weather conditions. The uncertainty ended more than a year later when a hiker in California's Sierra Nevada mountains stumbled upon Fawcett's pilot license and other personal items. This discovery led search teams to the crash site at an elevation of 10,000 feet, where they found the plane's wreckage and, eventually, small bone fragments confirmed as Fawcett's through DNA testing. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that Fawcett likely flew into a mountain downdraft strong enough to overcome his aircraft's ability to climb. The crash was so violent that the plane was shattered into thousands of pieces scattered across the steep, wooded slope. Before his final flight, Fawcett had accumulated an astonishing record of firsts. He completed the first solo circumnavigation of the world in a balloon, set numerous world records in long-distance sailing, and piloted the first solo non-stop flight around the world without refueling. He climbed some of the world's highest peaks, competed in the Iditarod dog sled race, swam the English Channel, and finished the Ironman triathlon. Richard Branson, a friend and fellow adventurer, described Fawcett as a remarkable man who's lived life to the absolute full, someone who just couldn't sit still. That restless spirit led Steve Fawcett to achieve what most would consider impossible, and ultimately it led him to his final, fateful flight into the unknown Nevada sky. Number 5. Percy Fawcett Jungle Enigma. What lies hidden in the Amazon rainforest? Percy Fawcett was determined to find out, even if it meant walking into oblivion. Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett wasn't just any explorer, he was a man obsessed. A British artillery officer, surveyor, and archaeologist, Fawcett developed a fixation on a lost city he called Z, which he believed existed somewhere in the uncharted jungles of Brazil's Mato Grosso region. While many dismissed his theories as fantasy, Fawcett was convinced that the dense Amazon rainforest concealed the ruins of an advanced ancient civilization. In 1925, with funding from a group of newspapers and financial backers, Fawcett embarked on his most ambitious expedition yet. At 57 years old, he ventured into the jungle accompanied only by his 21-year-old son Jack and Jack's friend Raleigh Rymel. Their small party size was intentional. Fawcett believed that a large expedition would appear threatening to indigenous tribes and would be more difficult to supply. On May 29, 1925, Fawcett sent a final letter to his wife from a camp at the edge of unexplored territory. He wrote, "You need have no fear of any failure," and set off into the wilderness. Those were the last verified words ever received from the expedition. Fawcett and his companions vanished without a trace. The disappearance sparked worldwide fascination and multiple search parties over the following decades. In total, an estimated 100 people died or disappeared themselves while attempting to discover Fawcett's fate. Various theories emerged. He was killed by hostile tribes, succumbed to disease or starvation, or perhaps even chose to go native and live among an isolated indigenous community, cutting all ties with the outside world. Reports trickled in over the years of supposed evidence. In 1927, a nameplate allegedly belonging to Fawcett was discovered in the possession of a tribal chief. In 1933, an explorer claimed that Fawcett's bones had been found in a tribal site. Most famously, in 1952, the Kalapalo tribe told Orlando Villas Boas that they had killed Fawcett and his companions after the explorers had offended them. None of these accounts has been conclusively verified. The most compelling aspect of Fawcett's story is that his quest wasn't entirely in vain. Decades after his disappearance, archaeologists began discovering evidence of large, sophisticated pre-Columbian settlements in the Amazon basin. Not exactly Fawcett's golden city of Z, but proof that his intuition about the region's hidden history wasn't as far-fetched as his contemporaries believed. Fawcett's disappearance has inspired countless books, including David Grann's bestseller, The Lost City of Z, which was later adapted into a film. The Colonel's fate remains one of exploration's most enduring mysteries, a reminder that even in the 20th century, parts of our planet remain so remote and dangerous that a person could still walk into the unknown and never return. Number 4. Jean-François de la Pérouse lost at sea. What happens when an entire expedition disappears? The mystery of Jean-François de la Pérouse and his 2 ships that sailed into history continues to intrigue us today. Imagine setting sail with the blessing of King Louis XVI of France, commanding 2 ships and 225 men on a scientific expedition around the world, only to vanish completely. That's exactly what happened to Jean-François de la Pérouse, whose 1785 expedition was meant to rival the accomplishments of Britain's Captain James Cook. La Pérouse was no ordinary sailor. At 44, he was already an accomplished naval officer who had fought in the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution. The expedition he commanded aboard the ships Astrolabe and Boussole represented the height of Enlightenment ideals, a scientific journey to map unknown coastlines, collect botanical and zoological specimens, and establish diplomatic relations with distant peoples. For nearly 3 years, the expedition proceeded largely as planned. La Pérouse and his men visited Chile, Easter Island, Hawaii, Alaska, California, Macau, the Philippines, Japan, Korea, and Russia. They sent back journals, maps, and specimens via other ships they encountered, providing Europe with valuable new information about far-flung regions of the globe. The expedition's last contact with European civilization came in January 1788 when they reached Botany Bay in Australia, just days after Britain's first fleet had arrived to establish a penal colony. British officers reported that La Pérouse planned to continue through the Pacific and return to France by the following year. After leaving Botany Bay, La Pérouse and his entire expedition vanished without a trace. As months stretched into years with no word, concern grew in France. By 1791, with the French Revolution in full swing, the National Assembly ordered a rescue mission to search for La Pérouse. King Louis XVI reportedly asked, "Any news of La Pérouse?" as he walked to the guillotine in 1793. But the search expedition found no definitive answers. The mystery remained unsolved until 1826, when an Irish sea captain named Peter Dillon came across a French sword hilt on the island of Vanikoro in the Santa Cruz Islands, part of today's Solomon Islands. Intrigued, he returned in 1827 and gathered more evidence from islanders, who indicated that 2 large ships had been wrecked there during a cyclone years earlier. Some crew members had survived initially but eventually either died on the island or attempted to escape in a small vessel they constructed from wreckage. Subsequent expeditions confirmed that La Pérouse's ships had indeed wrecked on Vanikoro's treacherous reefs. Archaeological work in the 20th and 21st centuries has recovered numerous artifacts from the wrecks, including cannons, anchors, and personal possessions. DNA analysis of skeletal remains found on the island confirmed at least 1 European presence. What became of any survivors who may have left Vanikoro in their makeshift boat remains unknown. Some theories suggest they might have reached the Australian mainland or other islands, but no conclusive evidence has been found. La Pérouse's disappearance represents one of history's great maritime mysteries. Had his expedition returned safely, France might have established a stronger presence in the Pacific, potentially altering the colonial landscape of the region. Instead, his fate serves as a stark reminder of the perils faced by those who ventured into uncharted waters in the age of sail. Number 3. Meriwether Lewis Mysteries on the Natchez Trace. Did one of America's most famous explorers really die by suicide? The strange death of Meriwether Lewis raises questions that still haunt us more than 2 centuries later. Meriwether Lewis had already achieved immortality. As co-leader of the Lewis and Clark expedition from 1804 to 1806, he had journeyed across the continent, facing grizzly bears, rapids, starvation, and hostile tribes to map the western territories of the United States. By any measure, he was an American hero, appointed governor of the Louisiana Territory by his friend and mentor, President Thomas Jefferson. Yet something went terribly wrong. On October 11, 1809, just 3 years after his triumphant return from the Pacific, Lewis died from gunshot wounds at Grinder's Stand, a small inn on the Natchez Trace in Tennessee. He was only 35 years old. The official ruling was suicide. Lewis had been exhibiting signs of mental distress for months. He was plagued by financial problems, struggling in his role as governor, and possibly addicted to laudanum, an opium tincture. His close friend Thomas Jefferson wrote that Lewis had suffered from hypochondria, which at that time referred to depression. Jefferson noted that this had seized him and made him sensible it would increase upon him at the approach of winter. According to Priscilla Grinder, the innkeeper's wife, Lewis behaved erratically the night of his death, pacing and talking to himself. She reported hearing a gunshot in the early morning hours, followed by Lewis's voice saying, "Oh Lord." Then came a second shot. When servants entered Lewis's room, they found him with wounds to his head and chest, still alive but unable to speak. He died shortly after sunrise. But from the beginning, questions surrounded this account. Some historians and family members have suggested that Lewis may have been murdered. They point to inconsistencies in witness testimonies and the curious fact that Lewis was shot twice, unusual in suicide cases, especially in that era when weapons were less reliable. Lewis was also carrying large sums of money and important papers, making him a potential target for robbery. Further complicating matters, Lewis's journals from the expedition, which he had been working to publish, disappeared after his death. Some have speculated that these contained information someone wanted suppressed. Others point to potential political enemies Lewis had made during his tenure as governor. In 2009, Lewis's descendants petitioned to exhume his body from its grave beneath a monument on the Natchez Trace Parkway. They hoped modern forensic techniques might resolve whether the wounds were self-inflicted or not. However, the National Park Service denied the request, citing concerns about disturbing the grave and uncertainty about what useful evidence might remain after 200 years. Without such evidence, the debate continues. Those who accept the suicide theory note Lewis's documented mental health struggles and the observations of contemporaries like Jefferson. Those who suspect murder point to Lewis's known enemies, the valuable items he was carrying, and the peculiarity of the wounds. What makes the case particularly poignant is that Lewis, who had survived incredible hardships during his famous expedition, including near starvation, treacherous river crossings, and a gunshot wound when a member of his party mistook him for an elk, met his end in a small roadside inn, far from the wilderness he had helped to map. Regardless of how he died, Lewis's contributions to American exploration remain legendary, though tinged with the tragedy of his premature death. Number 2. Donald Crowhurst, The Phantom Voyage. How far would you go to avoid facing failure? Donald Crowhurst's bizarre tale of deception and madness on the high seas remains one of the strangest in maritime history. In 1968, the Sunday Times of London sponsored the Golden Globe Race, the first non-stop, single-handed, round-the-world yacht race. Among the 9 competitors was Donald Crowhurst, a 36-year-old British businessman and amateur sailor who saw the race as a chance to save his failing electronics business through publicity and prize money. There was just one problem: Crowhurst wasn't ready. His trimaran, the Teignmouth Electron, was unfinished and untested. He had limited ocean sailing experience. His financial backers had made him sign a ruinous contract. If he failed to finish the race, he would have to reimburse them for the boat's costs, potentially bankrupting his family. Yet on October 31, 1968, with growing media attention and mounting pressure, Crowhurst sailed out of Teignmouth Harbor, waving to cheering crowds as cameras flashed. From the beginning, things went wrong. His boat leaked, equipment failed. He made slow progress. Within weeks, Crowhurst faced a terrible choice: continue into the dangerous Southern Ocean in a boat he increasingly realized wasn't seaworthy, turn back and face financial ruin and public humiliation, or something else. He chose deception. Crowhurst began reporting false positions, making it appear he was racing around the world when in fact he was dawdling in the South Atlantic. He created elaborate false logs with mathematical tables to calculate his supposed positions. He even fabricated stories of high speeds and dangerous conditions. Meanwhile, in reality, he was sailing in circles, waiting for the other competitors to complete the course so he could slip back into the race on their return leg. The plan was to finish in a respectable position, not first, which would trigger too much scrutiny, but not last either. He would gain some publicity for his business without winning the prize for fastest circumnavigation, which would have led to certain exposure of his fraud. But events took an unexpected turn. Most of the other competitors dropped out. By June 1969, only Robin Knox Johnston, who had already finished, and Nigel Tetley remained in the race. When Tetley pushed his boat too hard trying to beat Crowhurst's falsified position and sank, Crowhurst faced a new nightmare. He might actually be declared the winner, which would mean certain discovery of his deception. The psychological pressure became unbearable. Crowhurst's logbooks, recovered later, show his mental state deteriorating into madness. His final entries include bizarre philosophical ramblings about the nature of truth and sin, culminating in what appears to be a confession: "It is finished, it is finished, it is the mercy." On July 10, 1969, Crowhurst's boat was found drifting, abandoned in the Atlantic. His body was never recovered. The most widely accepted theory is that he committed suicide by jumping overboard, though some have suggested he might have fallen accidentally while disoriented. Crowhurst's story, with its tragic combination of ambition, deception, and mental collapse, has spawned books, documentaries, and films, including The Mercy, starring Colin Firth. It stands as a haunting reminder of how the pressure to succeed can drive a person to extremes, and how the isolation of the open ocean can amplify the darkest aspects of human psychology. Number 1. Jim Bowie, The Alamo's Last Stand. What makes a person choose certain death over surrender? Jim Bowie, already renowned for his knife-fighting prowess and frontier adventures, made just such a decision at the Alamo, securing his place in American legend. By the time James Bowie reached the Alamo mission in San Antonio in January 1836, his reputation already bordered on mythical. Standing over 6 feet tall with piercing eyes and a commanding presence, he had survived countless dangerous encounters across the American frontier. The famous Bowie knife, a fearsome large blade with a distinctive shape, was named after him following a notorious 1827 sandbar duel where he disemboweled a man with the weapon despite being shot and stabbed multiple times himself. Born in Kentucky in 1796, Bowie's adventurous life included land speculation in Louisiana and Arkansas, rumors of slave smuggling and piracy, and treasure hunting for lost Spanish silver mines. He married the daughter of a wealthy Mexican vice governor, became a Mexican citizen, and eventually sided with Texas independence fighters when tensions rose between American settlers and the Mexican government. When Bowie arrived at the Alamo with orders from Sam Houston to destroy the mission and retreat, he found that the commanding officer, Colonel James Neal, was unwilling to abandon the position. After Neal was called away on family business, command was eventually shared between Bowie and William B. Travis, though their relationship was contentious. The charismatic Davy Crockett, another frontier legend, helped mediate between them. By February 24th, Mexican General Antonio López de Santa Anna had arrived with an army of several thousand troops and placed the Alamo under siege. The defenders, numbering fewer than 200, rejected Santa Anna's demand for unconditional surrender. Legend has it that Colonel Travis drew a line in the sand with his sword, asking those willing to stay and fight to the death to cross it. According to the story, Bowie, who by this time was bedridden with either typhoid fever, tuberculosis, or pneumonia, accounts vary, asked to be carried across the line on his cot. Santa Anna ordered the final assault on March 6, 1836. Mexican forces attacked from all sides, eventually breaching the walls. The exact details of Bowie's death remain disputed, as no defender survived to tell the tale. The most common account holds that Mexican soldiers found him in his sickbed and killed him there. Some reports claim he fired his pistols at the advancing soldiers from his bed. Others suggest he propped himself up on his elbows, using his famous knife to fight until the end. A few Mexican accounts stated that he was among the last to die, showing tremendous courage despite his illness. The battle lasted less than 90 minutes, with all defenders killed. Santa Anna ordered the bodies burned. The brutal nature of the defeat transformed the Alamo into a rallying cry for the Texian army. Just 6 weeks later, Sam Houston's forces defeated Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto, shouting, "Remember the Alamo," as they charged. Bowie's death at the Alamo cemented his status as an American folk hero. Whether seen as a land swindler, slave trader, and opportunist, or as a brave freedom fighter and pioneer, Bowie's willingness to face certain death rather than surrender has made him one of the most enduring symbols of frontier courage and the American spirit of resistance against overwhelming odds. What is it that drives humans to push beyond known boundaries? Is the urge to explore so powerful that some are willing to pay the ultimate price for it?